America is the wealthiest country in the history of the world, yet there are people living in poverty. Does that mean we need income redistribution and more government programs? Welcome to Sharpening Arrows, where we train teens to think biblically about life and politics. I'm your host, Victor Jakes. Welcome to those of you who saw my interview on the Veritas Vox podcast, hosted by Marlon Detweiler. Really appreciated Marlon's hospitality and interest in the podcast and for having me on. It's a great conversation. Really enjoyed having the chance to discuss some current events. So if you're coming from that podcast, welcome. We try and sharpen arrows. We try and take teens and talk them through issues and help them think about what's going on in the issue, what people on the other side of an issue believe and why. One of the unique things about this podcast is we start with the best arguments for people that I personally disagree with. As I said on the podcast, if you've listened to the show, you know I'm a Christian conservative. So we will start with arguments from the left or from a non-Christian perspective, and then we'll refute those arguments and provide arguments in favor of the conservative Christian position. We also are on YouTube, youtube.com/@sharpeningarrows. As I've said before, I cannot promise you any fancy graphics, but every once in a while, my children will photobomb. So if that is of interest, youtube.com/@sharpeningarrows. All right, well, today I want to talk about wealth inequality. There's a lot of discussion about this. Socialist Zoran Mamdani is likely to become the next New York City mayor, and he's going to control the biggest city in the country. What is that going to mean? Well, let's start with a pause point. If you're new to the podcast, one of the things I do is I have these various points in the podcast where I encourage you to actually pause the podcast. I know you're not supposed to do that as a podcaster, tell your audience to stop listening. But parents, I think it's really important for you to discuss these issues with your teenager. I encourage you to listen to the show with your teenager and actually discuss it. Remember that you are your child's most important teacher, and I hope that this podcast helps facilitate those conversations for you. So let's have our first question here. Why are there vast differences in the amount of money that people have? We see it all around us. What causes it? Well, here's what Senator Bernie Sanders said last week. We're living in the richest country in the history of the world, right? All right, you tell me why we're the only nation not to guarantee health care to all people, the only nation not to guarantee paid family and medical leave, why we have a $7.25 an hour minimum wage, why we have 800,000 people sleeping on the street, why we have a president who denies the reality of climate change, why we have oligarchs on top who have more and more power every day. All right, before we dive into that statement, I actually want to talk about question 7 of the Great 8. And if you're new to the show, the Great 8 are 8 questions that I encourage you to put in your mental toolbox, that when you encounter something, that these are questions that you can use to kind of understand what's going on with the argument, if the argument holds up or not. And the question I actually want us to start with is question 7. Am I focused on the speaker or the argument? Now, as a conservative, it can be very easy to just dismiss Sanders as a crazy socialist. And there's truth to that. I certainly don't think that his policy prescriptions work. But I just want you to be careful. And parents, I want us to be careful because we may know why Sanders' policies are so destructive, why it is crazy to think that a government-run economy works better than a free market. But let's be careful that we don't just dismiss Sanders out of hand and not look at why his argument is appealing to millions and millions of young people. And if you're a teenager, I encourage you to do this too. Because when you're at home, it can be very easy just to say, well, that person's nuts, I don't have to listen to them. And then you'll go out in the real world and you'll meet people who have appealing arguments for this position. And if you haven't thought about it, if you haven't thought about what are the strong parts of this argument, you can find yourself wondering, oh, well, maybe he's right. Why are we so rich, and why are there poor people? So I just want us to keep that in mind, that even though this argument is coming from Senator Bernie Sanders, it's an argument that we need to take seriously. And what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to articulate an argument for this, even though you disagree with it. I want to challenge you to be able to articulate the argument in favor of this, because then you're going to understand the argument's weak spots and why it ultimately doesn't hold up. Okay, so I always joke that I try and keep these podcasts to 20 minutes. I'm not making it today, but there is a lot in Senator Sanders' statement, and I'm not going to have time to get into every specific. What I want to tackle is this general idea that the government should do more to reduce income inequality with either programs to pay for things or regulations that require companies to provide higher wages and benefits. And as I mentioned before, we're going to start with arguments for the wrong side, the side that I personally disagree with. All right, argument number one. Well, we can afford to do this. Just like Senator Sanders said, we are the richest country in the history of the world. What else are we supposed to do with our wealth? What higher purpose could there be than to make other people's lives better? What are you going to spend money on? A bigger TV? A bigger yacht? Your seventh house? Look at the people around you who are poor and who are struggling. We need to do more, and we can afford to do it. Argument number two. Your life would be better off. Now, if you're a teenager, this should be especially true. Imagine making $7.25 an hour. That's it. That's not even going to buy you a Big Mac meal. But if we raise the minimum wage, you could be making $12 an hour or $15 an hour. Or Zoran Mondami wants to make the minimum wage in New York City $30 an hour. Your life would be better off. You wouldn't have to worry about medical bills. The government would pay for it. Support these policies because they would help you. Argument number three. Inequality isn't fair. It isn't right that billionaires exist while people struggle with medical bills, while they worry about having to take time off to care for sick family members. It isn't right that there can be billionaires worth $80 billion and people don't even make $8 an hour. People are supposed to be equal. All men are created equal. Well, how can we be equal if people are making such vast differences or such a vast disparity in what people make? All right, let's have a pause point. Which of those arguments do you find the most persuasive, and why? And as you do that, let me tell you about Mama Bear Prayers, a podcast for moms who are knee-deep in dishes and training their teens. Whether you are in the carpool lane or the coffee line, host Charity Rios wants to come alongside you and help you grow deeper in your relationship with Jesus. Now, as every parent knows, raising kids can feel a bit like a ping pong game. You bounce from moments of joy to moments of deepest concern. Combine that with the busyness of life, and this back and forth can leave you feeling overwhelmed and even isolated. As the mom of four very busy boys, Charity knows this firsthand, and it's why she created Mama Bear Prayers, to support moms who are on the journey of raising kids. God works through prayer, so check out Mama Bear Prayers today. All right, let's have another pause point. I hope you did actually pause the podcast and talk about which argument you found the most persuasive. And so now let's ask this. How would you respond to that argument? Don't just depend on me. Don't just depend on your parents. Really think through it. Think about it. If someone said those things to me, what would I say in response? Okay. So let's dig into this. And I'm actually going to ask another pause point question in just a second. But oftentimes what happens with an issue like this, with a debate like this, is the debate is actually going on underneath the surface, and the disagreement is about fundamental issues or worldview issues, and it's coming out in a policy disagreement. But in order to actually attack these arguments, we have to dig beneath the surface a little bit and either agree or disagree on these kind of foundational issues. And if we can identify the foundational issue and we can have a debate about the foundational issue, that's where we're actually going to be able to convince someone, or at least understand why I believe what I believe. So here's the question. Here's the pause point. What is normal, poverty or wealth? Now, because we do live in the richest country of the history of the world, it can be natural to think that normal, that what happens just as a matter of course, is wealth. Because there is wealth all around us. Just by living in America in 2025, you are one of the richest people in terms of material possessions in the history of the world. But wealth isn't normal. Poverty is normal. Think back to Adam and Eve. They didn't have anything. God had to make them clothes when he kicked them out of the garden. There was no indoor plumbing. There was no cell phones. There was no modern medical technology. Okay, well, that was way, way long ago. Well, think back to the Middle Ages. There were a few people who didn't live in grinding poverty, but most did. Most were serfs, and they worked the land, and they hoped to have enough food to make it to the next year so they could work the land and have enough food. Now, contrast that with today. If you're poor, you most likely have a cell phone, unless your parents love you a lot and don't let you have a cell phone. That's an act of true parenting love right there. If you are in the South or the Southwest, you probably have AC in your home or apartment. If you're poor, you probably have a car or at least access to a bus or a transit system. You have access to the internet. You have access to modern medicine. Even if you can't afford it, you can go to the ER and they will not turn you away. Now, here's something remarkable. This is from Statistica. The percentage of U.S. adults who were obese in 2023 by annual income. Among those making $75,000 a year or more, it's under 30%. But if you made less than $15,000, it was 37.4%. So think about this. The poorer you are in the United States, the more likely you are to be obese. Now, there's certainly a whole nother conversation here about processed foods. But I just want you to understand, this is not the historical norm. Normally, for the vast majority of the history of the world, if you were poor, you were on the verge of starvation. The rich people, the very, 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 very rich people, they might be obese. Or at least might be a healthy weight. But when you were in grinding poverty, you were on the verge of starvation. We are so rich in the United States that the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be obese. That's not normal. All right, so let's have a pause point. So if wealth isn't natural, why is the U.S. rich? Okay, this is such an important thing to think about. Once we understand that wealth isn't normal, then we have to ask, well, why are we wealthy then? It didn't happen by accident. It didn't happen in the state of nature. What were the things that caused it? There's several, but again, in my vain attempts to keep this podcast close to 20 minutes, we're just going to focus in on the free market. This country has embraced the free market. And what the free market does is it creates value. Think about it like this. Say you go to Wendy's and you give them $2 for a cheeseburger. Maybe it's $3. Maybe you give them $3 for a cheeseburger. Well, Wendy's values your $3 more than the cheeseburger, and you value the cheeseburger more than the $3. Who wins in that transaction? See, both sides win in that transaction because both sides are better off. Because it's a free exchange, it creates value. The customer values the cheeseburger. Wendy's, the company, values the money. And so when you have a mutually beneficial trade and exchange, you're creating value. And when you have exchanges like that happen millions upon millions upon millions upon billions of times over 200 years, you create wealth. You create so much wealth in a society that the poorest people in the society are more likely to be obese. And so how do you get wealthy in the United States? And I don't want to talk, because again, we don't have time. There's so many issues tying in here. I don't want to talk about people who are getting wealthy because they're using the government to force people to buy a product. That's not the free market. That's cronyism. But in a free market, how do you get wealthy? By providing the most value to other people. Do you understand how incredible that is? In a free market, say you are totally self-interest, you're totally selfish, you want to get rich, you want to get richer than anyone else. Well, how do you get rich? You go out there and you create a company that provides more value to other people. Isn't that incredible? You get rich by serving other people. All right, so now that we've got an understanding of these foundational issues, we can address the arguments for redistribution and for more government regulation. All right, so here, the first argument, you remember, was, well, we can afford it. We're the richest country in the history of the world. Okay, this argument is like saying that because someone is a healthy athlete, they can eat all the junk food that they want. Now, that's true in a way, right? If you are a healthy athlete and you spend a week eating junk food, you will still generally be a healthy athlete. But think about what's happening. You're destroying the habit, one of the habits that made someone a healthy athlete. So what Bernie Sanders is saying is, because we're rich, we can afford it. And so we need to implement programs that are the complete opposite of what made us rich. Isn't that amazing? It's like telling an athlete, well, because you're a healthy athlete, you can eat junk food. Well, one of the reasons they're a healthy athlete is they think about what they eat. And once you take away that habit, you're going to make them a less healthy athlete. And further, no, we can't afford it. The national debt is $37 trillion. We spend more on interest payments on the national debt than defense. And now it's true, we haven't had an economic collapse, but one of the downsides of that debt, one of the things that has happened because of it, is inflation. In 1980, think about something you could buy in 1980 for $1. I know most of the teenagers, you weren't alive, but go way back before the cell phones, before the internet, when you had to actually dial a phone. Say something cost $1. Well, in 2025, this year, that thing would cost $3.93. So what that means is that a quarter in 1980 is worth almost as much as $1 today. That's inflation. That's the destruction of the currency and of the value the currency has. And one of the reasons for that is that we are printing money to pay for social programs, to pay for all that government spending, and it's causing massive inflation. And ironically, that inflation makes it harder for low-income folks and young adults to do things like buy a home. All right, argument number 2. Your life would be better off. Okay, again, in the immediate term, yes. If someone said, you don't have, your job is going to go from a $7.25 minimum wage to a $12 minimum wage. Okay, yes, in the immediate term, your life would be better off. Now, there's all sorts of downstream consequences like job loss of hours. But the bigger picture here is this, is that what matters in a free society isn't what the government does, It's what you do. It's your decisions. This is from CNBC, and it's talking about lottery winners. And just think about this. If someone wins the lottery, if someone comes into lots of money unexpectedly, that's sort of like a supercharged government program. Even Bernie Sanders isn't saying that we should hand out lottery jackpots to everyone. Well, what happened to those lottery winners? Again, this is from CNBC. Lottery winners are more likely to declare bankruptcy within 3 to 5 years than the average American. What's more, studies have shown that winning the lottery does not necessarily make you happier or healthier. What? How could that be? How could someone be more likely to declare bankruptcy when they've received a lot of money? Because it's your decisions that matter. Don't buy into this lie that it's the system, that it's the government, that it's someone else's fault. You live in a free society. Your choices determine your outcome. And there's another part to this. Sometimes people will think, oh, well, they were born into wealth, and that's not fair. And if only I had been born into wealth. Okay, well, this is from the Wall Street Journal. It came out just a couple days ago. Wealth advisors like to reference a 2023 book written by Victor Haghani and James White, The Missing Billionaires, which notes how rare it is for great family fortunes to last beyond a few generations. Did you hear that? These families that have just unimaginable wealth, it disappears in a few generations. Why? Because an individual's choices are so much more important than the circumstances. Even if the circumstances are winning the lottery or being born into a family with a great fortune. So again, don't buy into this lie that you need the government to make your life better off. You need to make better decisions that may not be pleasant right now, decisions that may involve suffering on the road to success. And I'm going to go to the grade 8 here and look at question 3. Is there a principle involved? And there actually is a principle involved here, which is don't steal. The government shouldn't be taking from some people and giving to other people. When we talk about the right to property, that right doesn't disappear because you get more property. So there is a principle involved here. All right, and then argument number 3. Well, inequality isn't fair. Okay, and this is why it's so important to have that foundation, to dig beneath the surface and to look at that foundational idea. Because once we understand that wealth isn't normal, wealth doesn't just happen, then we know we need to protect the things that led to the creation of that wealth. Inequality isn't fair, supposedly. So let's dig into this idea of equal, because there's two senses of it. In one sense, people are equal. God made people equal in the sense of their intrinsic worth as a human being. You and I are each created in the image of God. That gives our life great value. When we stand before God after we die, He's going to ask us if we have made Jesus the Lord of our life, if we have accepted His gift of salvation. And it doesn't matter if you are Donald Trump, the most powerful man in the world who's worth billions of dollars. If your answer isn't, yes, I have believed in Jesus Christ as my Savior and I turn my life over to Him, you are going to hell. Okay, so people are equal in that sense. But in another sense, of course people are not equal. God made us all different, and He put us in different circumstances. That was His decision. We are not God. We cannot know why He put some people in certain families. Why did He bless us and allow us to be born in the United States of America, or allow us to come and live here? He did not have to do that. He did not have to give us that blessing. But for the government to come and try and say, well, everything has to be completely equal, everything has to be completely the same, that requires violating the rights of others. That requires going in and saying, oh, you wanted to make that choice? Well, no, you can't do that because that wouldn't be fair to this person. Oh, you have too much money? I'm taking your money and I'm giving it to someone else. For government to try and make everything completely equal violates the rights of others. All right, I've actually gone so long today that I'm going to save the arguments uh, against income redistribution for a separate episode, because I don't want to turn this into a 40-minute episode. I'm really trying to keep these under a half hour so that parents, you can really discuss these things with your students. Again, if you've joined us from the Veritas Vox podcast, welcome. Great to have you here. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and share it with your friends and Christian community. Be courageous like Charlie, stay sharp, and give God the glory. I'll see you next time.